Adventures of Ellen White and the Pioneers. We are to obey God rather than men.
If we could visit our college in Australia on the opening day of school, we would see a stone monument. And on the monument is written the story of a furrow ground that led to the building of this great college. A furrow is like a trench. The writing says, "About 500 yards east of this spot was found this furrow, seen in a dream by Ellen G. White, which led to the establishment of the Australian Missionary College in this district in 1894. Elder James White had worked too hard, and he had died when he was 60 years old. And he and Sister White had worked together for 35 years, but now she must carry on alone as God's messenger." Later, she and her son Willie and his family went to Europe to help advance the churches there, and then they went to Australia to help the churches there. Mrs. White had only been in Australia a few months when she said, "We must have a college in this country." And when the church members heard this, they were surprised, and they asked, "How can we build an expensive building like a college when we only have about 500 Adventists in all of Australia?" But Sister White kept on talking about a college with lots of land. And finally a group of people were appointed to look for a good place to build a college. And after looking for several months, they found a big piece of forest land. The men wrote for Mrs. White to come and look at the land, and she went on the train with Elder and Mrs. George Starr and some other friends. And while riding on the train, Mrs. White told the others about an unusual dream she had several nights before. A dream like this is sometimes called a night vision. In the dream, the same angel who had appeared to her in other visions stood by her side and talked to her. She seemed to be looking at some land where the college could be built. And in the dream, Mrs. White seemed to be walking with her friends through the many trees in a woods forest. And soon they came to a small place where there were no trees, and instead they saw a small furrow that looked as if it had just been ploughed out or dug up to plant a seed in, like a trench. It was a small furrow, only about 6 feet long and 9 inches deep, and in the dream, as Mrs. White stood looking at the furrow, she saw the two men come and begin to examine the dirt. "This is not good land. The soil is not favourable," they said. And then in the dream, Mrs. White looked up and saw an angel standing on the furrow. She heard him say, "False witnesses have been born against the land." And then the angel described the different layers of dirt and explained the science of the soil. He said the land was good for raising fruits and vegetables, and would produce well if it was properly taken care of. The angel also said, "The Lord is able to set a table in the wilderness." That means that even in a wilderness, God can make food grow to put on our tables for food to eat. Mrs. White's friends were glad to hear about this dream, and now they felt sure that God had sent an angel to lead them to the right place to build a college. And when they arrived at the railway station, they were met by Elder Willie White and Elder Daniels and other conference men. And after eating lunch together, they got into 3 rowboats and they paddled up Dora Creek. At the boat landing on the edge of the land, they climbed the bank and went through the forest. Sister White sat down on a log to rest, while the group divided into teams and started off in the different directions to look at the land. Elder and Mrs. Starr returned before the men, and they asked Mrs. White if she'd like to look around a little. And as they were walking through the forest, suddenly they came to a clearing where there were no trees, and in the middle was a newly ploughed furrow. It was about 6 feet long and 9 inches deep, just exactly like the one Mrs. White had seen in her dream. While they stood wondering how it got there, 2 men came from different directions and stood at each end of the furrow. Then they bent over and picked up some of the dirt in their hands to examine it, and one of the men said, "This is not good land. The soil is not favourable." These were the same words that Mrs. White had heard in her dream. Then the other man said, "It's sandy and it seems to be sour. In my opinion, it will not grow anything." Then someone asked, "How did this furrow come to be here?" And all of them were puzzled. They could not understand who could have made it or how it had been made, because there was no plough or any other farm tool around. There were no horses, no hoof prints to show that a wagon or a buggy had been driven to that place, and even the grass was not trampled down. No, there was nothing unusual about the place except this newly ploughed furrow. The people who had ridden on the train with Mrs. White waited for her to tell the men about her dream. And after she finished telling them the dream, and they had heard what the angel had said, they did not have any more to say. They knew that if God said it would grow good fruits and vegetables, then it would. And so they made the return trip down the river that night, and they all felt that God had guided them to the right place to build the college. The group had requested a government land expert to visit the place and give a report on the land, and he gave them a very unfavourable report. He condemned the land as being very bad soil that would not grow anything. And now the committee had a difficult decision to make. They must either choose the report of the scientifically trained man who said the land was no good, or choose the words of the angel who had said that the Lord could produce good fruits and vegetables if it was properly cared for. They remembered in times past how God had especially blessed his people because they followed his counsel. Let's turn to Acts 5 verse 29 and see what the Bible says. It says, "We ought to obey God rather than men." Now let's turn to Luke 18 verse 27, and that says, "The things which are impossible with men are possible with God." And so the committee voted unanimously in favour of building the college on the land where they had seen that mysterious furrow. Who do you think ploughed that furrow? Surely it could have been none other than an angel of God who ploughed that furrow. God blessed the school from the beginning, and a lady gave $5,000 to finish paying for the land, and not one student or teacher became sick that whole first winter. There had been much joy and lots of singing since that day over 100 years ago, when God sent an angel to help the people in Australia find the right place to build their school. Hundreds of its students had gone to different parts of the world to serve as missionaries. Hundreds of people have eaten food sent out from that health food factory where many young people work to earn their expenses for a college education. And the Australian people are very proud of their nice college and their wonderful food factory. And they are so thankful that the committee decided to obey God that day rather than government scientists who said that the land was no good. Come and join us next time to hear about a message for Ella.